This is Kase Johnstun. This is a Literally podcast. We're podcasting today from Banyan Studio on historic 25th Street in Ogden, Utah. Today, our guest is Adrian Stumpp, and we're going to talk about his new novel and a lot of other things. But the new novel is called The Crow's Head: The Chemical Marriage, Book 1. Adrian is joining us in person today, which is rare, but it's great. That means we have an Ogden author or a local author with us. It's been a while since we've been able to do it. I'm glad to be here. It's been since April.
Yeah, Kase, you're also in person.
I'm also in person, and I started the day off. I asked Brandon when Adrian got here if we needed my computer to Zoom Adrian in, but Adrian was here with us, so that just shows you where my brain is these days. But we're going to talk about The Crow's Head: The Chemical Marriage, Book 1. Welcome, Adrian.
Thanks, Kase. I'm glad to get to talk to you.
Yeah, it's really fun to actually be in person and not staring at a little screen. And so let's start. Should we start with a reading? Should we do a reading later? What should we do, Brandon?
We can start with the reading.
Let's start with the reading. Yeah, let's start with the reading.
Okay.
Here you go. If you haven't seen that, I said, here you go. This was a...
Here's your own book.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome.
And if you don't know, just to tell everybody, I've had a wonderful Rooster's Hard Seltzer, which is our sponsor, right, Brandon?
Well, not this show, but another show, Van Sessions.
They should sponsor this show. Kim Bouchard, if you're listening, your son is in my class right now. And if you don't
that's true. Yeah.
If you do not sponsor this show, his grade is in jeopardy. How does that sound? Well, I haven't had a lot to eat today, but I'm 2 of these in. So
yeah, and the seltzers will catch up on you. You gotta be careful. Yeah.
Hopefully, I last that long too. I'm on my second as well. So.
Good. All right, let's hear the reading.
Okay. Albert's breath rises in firelight. Bitter cold in the mountains and the peasants sparse this far from the village. Days go by without language soiling the forest. He has not laid eyes on a human being since Michaelmas. Poimandres, his only company, spends most of his life asleep by the fire or purring in Albert's greatcoat. The roof needs mending, but there are no iron nails and no chance to get some before spring. So he does his best with peat moss and river clay. The daub mortar freezes and cracks. It falls off one wall and leaks what little warmth the hearth provides. Heat flies out the same way cold leaches in. On the worst nights he heats a lead bar until its belly turns purple. He moves it with a fire iron to a leather pocket sewn into the mattress. Keeps the hay warm and the rot out. Sometimes in his sleep he kicks the lead and blisters the soles of his feet. Mornings bring rime glittering on the furs he keeps for blankets. The days last only a few hours, long enough to fetch water from the brook and chop enough wood to keep thawed another night. He works on the chapel until last light bleeds on the mountains round about. Nights wiled by firelight over astrological charts, reading the sky and writing it on paper with a square and compass. Light poured by the gods as they wander in heaven. It says the time is coming to begin again. Stars promise it will work this time. In a few months, the Lord of Aries will bring a grand cross. Mercury in conjunction with Saturn opposite Venus and Jove. The sun and moon in the 1st and 8th houses trine to Mars. Time comes again to bend the elements. Make fire and water dance with earth and air. The dance begins with dragon blood, the primary material of the cosmos, taint in the heart of God. It existed at the moment of creation as the one and only substance, prime matter. All the elements are born of its decay and atoned in its perfection. Every object and force, every emotion and thought are other names for the dragon. The thought and the thinker and that which it thinks about are symptoms of the blood. When the ink freezes, Albert sets the well to thaw on a flagstone above the fire and goes to bed. In the morning he fetches the dragon. He knows where to seek it. He learns it from the trees. Branches that groan under fresh snow, the muffled thump of down deadwood. Let gray alders point the way. He follows the murmuring brook, whispering to rocks beneath a skin of floe ice, to a crag in the limestone face. drawn like a migrant bird back to the place of his conception, digging in snow-crusted muck, midwife to the earth, reading the stones, the shifting light slants in bald beech trees, deflected by the yawning crag, numb fingers, stiff as kindling despite leather gloves. Several times he stops and holds them in his armpits to bring them back to life. At the bedrock he wipes mud away, cleaning the wound to the bone, and the blunt end of his hatchet breaks off a chunk. He cleans it with snow and turns it in his hands for inspection. A vein of oily lightning zigzags through the gray ore, like a shattered mirror that drinks up sun and reflects midnight at the sky. Hermes' signature in the earth, as plain as if the god signed his name with quill and ink. The primeval chaos yearning for order, and well-ordered nature ill for want of chaos. What Albert's master taught to him as dragon blood. It glistens in the forest light. He shaves flakes from the ore with a chisel and hammer, and rubs them between his fingers, just to be sure, and he is sure. Fine black chaos, as pure as he ever witnessed. He flees the ravine, chased by twilight, saying thank you as he goes to the brook water, the limestones and granites. Thank you, peat moss. Thank you, beeches, alders, and yews. The forest breaks on the horns of a waning moon. In the clearing, Albert props the stone on the stump used for a chopping block. He dresses the ore into a rough oval, flat on the bottom, and places the chisel over its heart. A single hammer stroke splits the ore neatly in half to reveal its delicate striations. Prime matter, black and grooved in its limestone prison, the soul of the elements bathed in moon milk. He will get the woman to bless it before the work begins. Slow Henry will need blessing too. Albert runs his fingers over the inky surface and pities it. How it will suffer in his hands. How Albert will torture it and love it at the same time. The great work begins the same as it ends. In fire.
Okay, so like based on the reading, I think everybody who's listening can, I don't know, like if you're like me and we spend our days, Adrian and I spend our days in writing, and we spend our days in words, and we think about prose and we think about art, right? I want that this for the first question, obviously, is twofold, right? It's twofold. There's two different questions. I really enjoyed reading this book because, like poetry, this book is not something I could never write. This is not a book I could ever write, because I think, you know how it is when you look at other writers and you say, oh my gosh, how did they write that? That's something that could have never come from my brain. My brain does not work this way. So I wanted to ask you, like, first off, the first question is, to me, I would say it's fantasy, right? But the prose felt like Gothic noir, you know, like your prose is like Gothic noir. It's like this really cool look where the prose mimics the story itself, where it's almost like a journey in, like, each paragraph feels kind of like, well, there's going to be this paragraph of description, right? It's going to be a paragraph of Gothic noir description where we're feeling extremely dark inside the language, and then the story is feeling dark at the exact same time. That's why, like, I would say it was probably like, if the prose feel like Gothic noir. But how would you define the book? Is it at a crossroads with different genres? And also, where conceptually did this begin? Because I know it's going to be a series, correct? It's going to be the multiple books following the protagonist. First off, where would you define? I mean, so I don't want you to define it if you don't want to. I mean, that's one thing. Is like, why define it if it's not necessary? Because the prose was just, I loved the prose in the book because it felt Gothic noir, and I like Gothic novels. And you may not even think that at all. You're like, oh, you think it's Gothic noir? It's nowhere even close. But how would you? And please tell me I'm completely wrong. How would you define it? And then where conceptually, like, where you know, my novels have always started with an essay, and they just became an exploration of the essay in fiction. So I love to hear, like, where this conceptually, where this conceptually came from.
Let me start with that, and then remind me of the first part of your question,
absolutely.
because I'll probably forget by the time.
Oh yeah, that's yes.
This the story about where it really started is maybe kind of disappointing.
No,
Probably in like 2009, I read Nicholas Basbane's nonfiction book, A Gentle Madness, which is about book collectors and like old libraries and book collectors and old books, and like The Gentle Madness is bibliophilia.
Uh-huh.
One of the books that he kind of goes on about in that book is called The Chemical Wedding. And I just loved kind of those words together, like that, the wordplay of that language, chemical and wedding together, was just super evocative to me. And I just immediately thought, like, I want to steal that. I want to use that title, like that's a great title. I have no idea what that is, but I love the title.
And it was originally a book, or?
So it's a late medieval, early Renaissance alchemical allegory. The actual title of it is The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. It's one of the founding texts of the Rosicrucians. But so it's an alchemical allegory, but it reads like a fever dream because everything is symbolic in it.
And there's a lot of that in your book.
Yeah. Everything is symbolic. Everything kind of means something else. And so it reads really like a kind of it reads like it was written in the 60s or the 70s, or it reads like a Jean Genet, just really kind of crazy. But not because it's like a drug-addled nightmare.
Right.
It's because everything kind of means something other than what it literally means. But that's what started me down it. Was I wanted to write a book that was called The Chemical Wedding. So I kind of wanted to know what that meant. And I looked up the source material and discovered that. And it was just really interesting to me. And I started to see how I could tell a story that would matter to me and matter to people who care about the same kind of things that I care about, that I could kind of build out of this alchemical allegory. It just really kind of intuitively came together to me that I could see how I could kind of write about the things that are my obsessions to write about through the lens of this. And I'd always really liked like retelling stories rather than trying to invent a story. Kind of retelling a story had always kind of been my mode. So that came really naturally to me. And then just the imagery and the subject matter just felt really powerful to me. And then I did a ton of research about alchemy. Maybe another part that kind of ties into that is I've always had kind of like a love-hate relationship with fantasy fiction. What I really dislike and don't like is like escapist, the escapist aspect of fantasy literature. Really, any literature can kind of have its escapist aspect, but I just always felt really kind of resentful towards literature as escapism. I fall into the camp that wants literature to be like, put me into relationship with the world that exists.
Right. So with the fantasy, it's too far removed. Like with your book, we have a tie to the real world, and we don't get into the stuff. I mean, there's an initial tie, a grounding in the real world.
Right. Yeah. And that I'm essentially a literary naturalist or realist.
Sure.
Essentially.
Yeah.
But there are things about fantasy that I do like, which is the really kind of archetypal, the kind of things that are really fun that you get from something like The Lord of the Rings or Star Wars, where like the trope of like the old wise teacher, right, or the villain or the hero or the dragon. I wanted to write something that was like that, but was not ironic about it, that was kind of genuine and sincere about it, but also dealt with the world the way the world is and wasn't trying to escape the world that we live in.
Right. And the problems that we face. Right, because like in the catalyst,
and the context that we exist in.
Because the catalyst in this book is built in the real world. It's built in someone's greed, or his want to get ahead, or his want to finish, not in a fantasy realm.
Right. Yeah.
And there's a mirroring throughout when you read it. There's a mirroring between which really I love how Adrian explained it, because throughout there's a mirroring between dreams and the real world, and I love that how they weave together throughout. But now I can even see where you're coming from, where the fact where in the dream world it's doing really a lot of the same things as the real world is, but just sharing it allegorically.
Right. Yeah.
That was super cool. Like, and I like dreams, and Adrian was a teacher like me. And, you always tell your students, don't...
You say was.
Yeah. He got out.
I escaped.
Unlike you.
Unlike me, I went back in. I don't know what I'm doing.
I may eventually go back.
Yeah.
But I needed a break.
Yeah. Well, he needed a break because we talked about something that we can't put on the podcast earlier today. But, and I love the mirroring of dreams throughout this book. And it's through two protagonists, right? I mean, one protagonist, but almost dual protagonists. Would you define them that way?
Yeah. So that goes into the kind of what the chemical wedding is about, or what the alchemical imagery is about, which is so this is not so much to do with like kind of writing or literature. It's really more to do with history, or the history of the kind of Rosicrucians, I guess.
Well, explain the Rosicrucians, because that's a new word to me.
Okay. Yeah. So the Rosicrucians are a secret society. They often get compared to like the Freemasons.
Mm-hmm.
They're a Masonic kind of like secret society, but they were created they kind of come out of the late medieval, early Renaissance world. And so as a matter of history, all that happens is that 3 manifestos are published. And these manifestos are kind of a call to reform, which happens kind of in sync with the Protestant Revolution. And so the Rosicrucian, they're kind of primary things that they are asking the world for are greater freedom for the sciences, greater freedom for the arts, kind of, and something that isn't quite articulated that eventually will become like Republican democracy, small r, Republican democracy,
like representative
democracy, or democratic republicanism,
right. Yeah.
So kind of less of a stranglehold on the part of the clergy and the king, more freedom for the arts and the sciences. These are the things that they want. They published 3 manifestos, and the first one is kind of like a creation myth that tells the story of their founder, who is Christian, actually Frater CRC, who is thought of to be Christian Rosenkreuz. And it's really just kind of like a creation myth kind of a story. The second one is a proper kind of political manifesto.
Sure, yeah.
And then the third one is this fever dream of an allegory. And so the imagery that they take up is the imagery of alchemy, of medieval alchemy, and they adopt that as kind of like their working metaphor. What's historically interesting about them is that they come onto the scene sheerly through the publication of these 3 documents. They raise a lot of interest. A lot of people who are very famous and very important to the history of the arts and the history of the sciences kind of go looking for the Rosicrucians because they want to join the Rosicrucians and can't find them. They don't exist really anywhere. All they are is the publication of these 3 documents. And then they are silent forevermore. And later on, you get the kind of creation of esoteric orders and secret societies that claim to be the Rosicrucians in a kind of conspiracy theory, new agery kind of a way.
Yeah.
But the only thing that is, as a matter of like verifiable fact, can be proven about them is these 3.
The 3 manifestos.
The 3 manifestos.
Huh. And so this is.
So that just grabs my imagination.
Oh, sure. Well, I've never heard about it. Brad, have you ever heard about this? And I'm grabbed.
No, not at all. But I'm fascinated right now. Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, I'm horribly fascinated by it. And that's where
I want to know more already.
I know that's exactly what I was thinking. And so the book kind of came from the chemical wedding based on.
Yeah. So the book. So what I kind of decided to do was I'm going to retell this allegory, but I'm going to do it in a way that
the third manifesto.
The third manifesto.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Because the first one is kind of a creation myth. The second one is just a really dry, what you think of a manifesto.
Yeah.
And then the third one is this like science, like maybe the first science fiction novel ever written.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it precedes the Book of Mormon. So yes, I guess so. In grad school, I did my thesis, or one of my major projects was looking at the Book of Mormon as alternative history and Doctrine of Covenants as a, what did I say it was? It was science fiction. And my teacher loved it. But no, I'm horribly intrigued by this. That is really, really cool. So you're retelling of the third manifesto.
Yeah, so I'm retelling the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz is the official name. And it's told in 7 days. So the first day, the second day, the third. And
this seems familiar for some reason.
Right. Well, quick question. Is Christian the name ironic or what?
No, so it's a Christian allegory.
Okay.
So it is Christ of the Rose Cross.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the potency in the image of the Rose Cross is that what they're trying to do is they recognize that because of history up to their time, the feminine has kind of been cut out of society and religion especially. It's been devalued. And part of what they're wanting to do is reawaken the feminine and then integrate the masculine and the feminine in like alchemically, like thinking of in the sense that like an alchemist would want to turn lead into gold in this like radical transformation kind of a way. One of the ways that they think about it is as a reawakening, like what is wrong with man is that the feminine has kind of been shut down.
Sure.
And it needs to be awakened and then integrated. And they see this as being like, as this is the actual kind of Christian mystery. So this whole like transforming lead into gold, that's a metaphor for genuine like Christian conversion, you know?
Yeah.
It's the conversion that happens inside of the soul.
Yeah.
Is turning lead into gold.
Right.
That's the way that they're playing with the metaphor.
With the alchemy.
With the alchemy
side of it. Yeah.
So they're thinking of alchemy as being a metaphor for Christianity. Alchemy is an older thing than that, and so I'm trying to embrace kind of the entire history of alchemy. Right. Which goes back to the Egyptians.
Right.
But where it kind of started with the Rosicrucians is that. But it's told in 7 days, and so I'm writing 7 novels.
7 parts, 7 novels,
And kind of what happens in each of the 7 days happens in my novel.
Okay.
Like what happens in the first day of the chemical wedding. It begins on Easter Sunday. Christian Rosenkreuz is saying his prayers, and there's a knock at his door, and at the door is the angel of the Lord, who gives him an invitation to the wedding of the king and the queen. And that's all that happens.
That's what, And with the book, it makes so much sense.
Right, that happens.
Right, yeah. Well, we don't want to give too much away. That's the hard part. But we don't want to give too much away. But right. And And so when I'm horribly intrigued.
Well, I'm just happy you started with something nice and light and easy.
Well, then, no, but Adrian says, well, it's not that interesting. And I'm like, oh, yeah, well, I've done a lot of podcasts. And I'm like, okay, like with my stuff, when I start a book, it's not that interesting. I'm like, I base it on an essay. That's pretty boring shit, right? Adrian's like, it's not that interesting, and I've been intrigued for the last 10 minutes.
I know.
The whole history of
Fantastic.
Yeah, I know. Like, this is probably the best answer to what was the conception of a novel that we've had in years.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
I felt like it was uninteresting because it really just came from like, what the hell do those words together mean?
Well,
What does the chemical wedding mean?
No, it was like, why? The question is really like, why did you write this book? And that was probably when I probably learned more in that one
Yeah.
than I have in 4 years
Yeah.
about a conception of a book.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was cool. That was really, really cool. So now looking at it, you're retelling each story.
Oh, if I can say one more thing
Sure,
about
yeah, absolutely.
like where you kind of started with that, one
Yeah.
of the things that really made me happy inside
Mm-hmm.
was when you said this is a book that I could have never written,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that feeling. Like that is one of the things that makes me love literature and love literary fiction in particular is when I read something that is such a confrontation with the other that I know that I could not have. I know that like in that kind of solipsistic sophist way, I am not the only thing that exists
Right.
in the universe.
Right.
Because I could have never come up with this.
Right. That's
This is not something that would have come from me.
right. Well, sometimes, you sink into that feeling of, am I creating my own universe? Right. You know,
kind of-
because especially with the stuff these days with like where you think something and then you're on Facebook and the ad pops up. You're kind of like, I think I'm creating, or you learn a new word. What do they call that? What's the term where you learn something new and then all of a sudden it's in your
And you
world.
hear it all the time?
You hear it all the
Yeah.
time. That, you know what?
Or you buy the car and then you see them everywhere.
everywhere. Yeah. Well, I don't know what that's called.
I don't know.
Either.
Yeah, but it happens all the time. You're like,
Yeah.
I learned that new word, then all of a sudden, I hear that word all the time, and I probably did my whole life, but I never knew it. I wasn't paying attention, and you're exactly right. It's like I could never write this book, so I could never imagine this book being written. So I am not.
Yeah.
I can't be alone in this universe.
I feel like my first experience of that was reading a female author. Like women would write a book that I would like. I
Right.
would have never written this book.
Right. I could never, from my
I
experience.
would not. Yeah. Like my experience of being a person in the world is so completely different.
Yeah, we live in different.
The priorities that this book sets
Yeah.
as its priorities
Right.
that I know that I'm not the only thing that exists in the universe.
Yeah, I thought that's awesome because I was like, that's so true.
Yeah.
Because I do. Do you ever get in that feeling like, I don't know, man. I think maybe I'm making all this stuff up. Right? I mean, if you think enough, right? But that's a perfect example of how we can't.
Yeah.
And my wife says to me things all the time. And he's talking about women. She's like, "You live in a different world than I do," and she's right.
Yeah.
Women,
Well, I don't want to just tie it to the difference between men and women.
Of course not, right.
But that's just an example.
That's an example.
So that resonates
Absolutely.
with, I love when people say things like that because
Yeah.
I know what they're feeling.
Well, and I feel that way with poets.
Yeah.
I really feel that. I mean, I love, like when I started, I've said this, now this is one thing that's been said a million times on this podcast. Before I write every morning, I get 20 minutes a day to write.
Uh-huh.
That's it. Because before the day starts. I'm sure you understand this. We don't get a lot of time to write.
Like kids, family.
and
Work. Yeah.
work. And
Yeah.
before I start in the morning, I read poetry because it gets me into that space. It gets me in that space a lot faster than reading prose does.
Yeah. That's a good way to start your day.
Yeah, I mean,
I actually read poetry to get into the writing process.
That's
like
what- yeah,
I
that's what I'm saying,
begin
yeah.
like when I'm actually sitting down to write my pages for the day
Mm-hmm.
or my work. Like if I'm lucky, it's pages.
yeah, right. Yeah, right.
I read a little poetry just because the concision of the language and the kind of bigness
Yeah.
of the language
And that I'm exactly the same.
it puts me in that space.
Every morning, I can't write until I read,
Uh-huh.
and so I pick up poetry every single morning. Well, every morning that I write, I pick up poetry because it's immediately heavy.
All right. I want to know what you
Rich.
guys read though. What do you guys
Are
dive
you
into?
ever worried about just adopting the voice that you're reading
I was in the
and
beginning.
writing that way?
In the beginning, I mean, how long have you been writing?
Yeah, a long time.
Right, same. I think in the beginning, yeah, I was worried, and maybe I did. I might have even.
Uh-huh.
But now, no. Now I know once I get my rhythm, because here's what I do, and This is not my interview, Adrian.
Adrian's good.
I want to hear your process.
He's interviewing
too.
me back here. I open my Scribner document. I read what I wrote the day before, so I know what my goal is.
So you kind of refresh a little bit.
Yeah, and then I read poetry, and I jump back in knowing what I want to read, and I know my own voice enough now, as you do.
Sure.
But maybe in the beginning, I did adopt it. Maybe I adopted that kind of.
Well, I definitely have that. Like if I read things that I wrote when I was in my early 20s or even in my teens, they're little scraps of like music lyrics.
Yeah. Right.
In there, so I was like picking that up.
Right. Yeah. I think if I look back a decade, 15 years ago, I can see who I was reading in nonfiction in my writing.
Yeah.
In the prose, in the syntax.
Sure.
In the diction. Now I've got my own thing, I think, enough. But I can see it. I can see Abby back 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I can see Terry Tempest Williams in it. Lots of Utah desert riders.
Sure.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. But when I say that to people, a lot of people are worried, are suspicious and skeptical of that process because they're scared that what they read is going to influence what they write. Like they're almost kind of scared of plagiarism. Like they don't want to read something and then write that too closely,
Yeah. Mine's about headspace. It's all about, it's just poetry gets me in a headspace.
Yeah, me too. It gets me in a mood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same. But I can't write poetry.
I start to feel like a wordsmith. I start to feel like language flows out of me.
Exactly.
Like
I am
such a feast.
We are
that
so
I've
much.
Just had,
we are so much the same.
Yeah,
we are so much the same. Because poetry gets me in. I don't believe in muse. I believe in. I believe in initial muse. Do you know what I mean? Like to write a book. Like you had you ran into this, the Rosicrucians. Is that close?
Yeah, Rosicrucians.
Rosicrucians. And that's muse. You're like, I want to tell a story in a literary / magical realism / and I think I swear the prose feels noir. Maybe that's the time period too, but it was like, that's muse. I think that initial boom, I want to write this book. I think
inspiration.
The inspiration, but the daily stuff, I don't think the daily stuff is muse. I think the daily stuff is getting myself in the headspace.
Yeah, that's fair enough. The way I think about the muse, I guess, I believe in it a little more. I think than most people want to kind of like the whole 99% perspiration, 10% inspiration.
Yeah.
I definitely, like in the day-to-day grind, I totally agree with that.
Right.
But also, I have plenty of moments where I write something and like kind of read back over it.
And you're like, wow, that was...
Who wrote that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and as writers who've been writing so long, you're in the grind every day writing. You're getting your words out. You don't remember writing them sometimes. Like you go back, like you probably look at your book. Sometimes you're like, I don't remember writing that paragraph. It's pretty darn good though. That was a good paragraph. And we don't give ourselves that much credit often.
I for sure don't. I don't think I deserve that much credit.
I'm the same way. I'm the absolute.
But I definitely think I will even get to the end of my words for the day. And if you asked me, how much did you write today? I would say like 2 paragraphs. Yeah. And I wrote like 3 pages.
Yeah. Yeah. Lately, I've been at 3. My goal lately, just because of life, has been 300 words. If I get 300, and before that, Brandon's been with me here for 5 years. 1,000 words was always my daily. Lately, it's 300.
You feel like an underachiever now?
I feel like.
Or do you feel lighter now?
I feel like the pressure's off a little bit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I feel like the pressure's off a little bit.
Yeah.
I really do.
I write a paragraph or 2 a day, half a page a day.
Yeah.
That's a big book for a paragraph a day.
Yeah. How long did it take to write?
I started it in earnest in 2014.
Okay.
But I wrote 2 novels before I set about publishing this one.
Yeah.
It probably took me 2.5 to 3 years.
Once you
in
start
the first
rolling.
draft, but it was also really clean. Like another thing that I do is write really pretty slowly and meticulously.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a ton. I do have some, but I don't have a ton of revision to go back
the second time. Same with me. I'm the same way.
because the structure, the narrative structure is pretty tight and in place
already. Yeah.
already, because I have been so deliberate and slow about the process.
Right. Yeah.
And there will still be parts that, like, I got to the end and there's a couple parts that need to be written that I never wrote, and they kind of need to be filled in and written.
Yeah.
So I need to go back and do those.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there'll be a couple parts that, like, I thought would matter and they were really compelling to me in the moment. But now that I see the full arc,
you can take them out.
they don't really belong.
Yeah.
So I never delete them. I cut them and I put them in a file.
Sure.
And there'll be something else.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely.
I don't actually murder my darlings. I just try to find the right home for them.
I just save as.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Save
Yeah.
as. There still exists somewhere.
That reminds me, I have a question for both of you.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a writer. I
You are right.
dream to be. I want.
Brandon's gonna be a writer.
That's true. There's a movie, famous movie, Love Actually, and there's a character in there. He's a writer, and he uses an old-fashioned typewriter. And there's a moment there, a scene, it's a beautiful scene where the wind comes up and all the papers go in the pond, and then they got to go get all the papers and save them. Do you ever sometimes wish you could just go back to the paper, or is this like the save as and the copy and paste, and just makes everything so much easier that it's way better now?
Adrian, you go first.
I think about that all the time because I think I actually write differently if I'm writing longhand in a notebook versus if I'm typing on a computer. Like, the thing that I actually create is a totally different thing depending on which one I'm doing.
Yeah.
So if I'm having I don't want to say writer's block, because I have mixed feelings about the existence of writer's block. But if I'm having a hard time and it's just really like I'm not pulling anymore, I'm pushing this
Yeah.
thing, you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll go back to a spiral bound notebook and start writing that way to kind of clear that. But I have noticed that, well, for one thing, like, if you have to write longhand, then you're a little more, you kind of know the whole sentence before you actually start writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Whereas if you're typing, then you just kind of, as thoughts come, you type, and then you may delete, start again. It's happening kind of in real time. But if you have to actually, like, scratch something out every time you screw up, then you're a little more careful about at what point am I done thinking about what I want to write, and I actually write it down. So sometimes just that kind of meditative deliberateness is what you need to kind of, like, get over a hump. You know? So yeah, I totally think that you create something different based on if you are typing or if you are
writing,
or
you're on a. I actually was almost gonna say word processor, but a computer. You know. Yeah.
Well, my computer basically is a word processor. It's not a very fancy computer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's really interesting. I'm blocked. Brandon's gone. Like I said, we've been doing this a while. And I always say there's no writer's block, but I disagree. I'm trying to write this essay right now about Michael Hutchence and about his life and how this merge of my life, Michael Hutchence's life, and obviously, no, Michael Hutchence never knew I existed. It's not anything like that. I've never met the man, but I'm blocked. I'm blocked right now, and I use, because I want to say something real with it. You know what I mean? You're like, a lot of essays I write that I've published, I tell a story. And the story's entertaining. You know what I mean? And people like it because it's entertaining, and there's maybe a lesson at the end, or not a lesson, but at least a looking back at some
and you're a good writer in that mode.
Yeah, and
you have
I want to say something with this essay, and now I'm blocked because you know what I mean? It's almost like I have a thesis. And that is killing me with it. And here's the thing, going back to what Adrian was saying about writing, the different forms and different creativity through the forms. I don't think I started really I didn't think of myself as I never started creative writing until 2000. And I was at Kansas State, and my parents bought me this laptop, and this was basically it looked like a car battery. That's how thick it was.
Yeah.
And it was basically a word processor it was so old and stuff like that. I've never written by hand.
Really?
Never. But maybe this is something that I should do with where I'm blocked right now.
This is your little key. Yeah.
This is my little key. Because
it's not what it used to be, but I still have the callus on my middle finger from writing so much all the time. You can still see it, although it used to be enormous. It used to be freakish. Now it's not so much because I mostly type, but I used to have this enormous callus on my finger from like where the pencil would sit.
Yeah.
You know?
I never did it, which is really intriguing. It's really intriguing. This is Kase Johnstun. This is Literally Podcast. We are talking to Adrian Stumpp today, and this conversation I love it.
Yeah,
so I forgot to do our little break-in, our little chop. We began talking
show your
about
book off here.
show the book. We began talking about The Crow's Head, the first book of 7.
Perfect.
Based on the. You gotta say it again for me.
The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz.
Just rolls off the tongue.
Rolls off the tongue, not for me. But I really enjoyed the book. But I love the prose. I love the prose, and I love the weaving of dreams, and how I feel even more enlightened today because of the fever dreams that Adrian was talking about, and how they are mirror, metaphorical, all at the same time, but weaving throughout the book. Yeah. So if you're gonna go buy a book, and if you're going to buy a book from an Ogden author, go buy the book.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious about audience when you write something like this, because it's so new and maybe a little different. Like who do you consider, and who reaches this type of a reading first?
Yeah, I don't know. This is one of the things that I struggle with. And when I have conversations with my friends and my wife, and just kind of like trying to think out loud about like, who am I talking to? You know, like who, you probably like understand the feeling when all the time you kind of like are writing or get to kind of to the end of your writing day. And I'm like, who fucking cares about what I have to say
all
about
the time?
Anything,
yeah.
You know? Like, why is this a thing that needs to exist in the world?
Right.
Well, because you care.
I should just make more money is what I think. I should just spend more time at work.
Yeah. Because as we know, our books haven't brought us any money. I don't know. Yours might, but mine has. You know, we were doing we're redoing our financial like retirement stuff, and the woman who's doing it.
I have a podcast for that. But.
Yeah, the woman who's doing it said, "Well, what about royalties? Can we put that in as your monthly salary?" And I looked at her like, "What are you fucking talking about?" You know, it's like royalties. No royalties. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I cut you off.
Anyway.
Not to claim on my retirement. That's for sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have a hard time kind of thinking about who is my audience. I mean, I definitely start, and when I'm actually writing, what I'm trying to do is write the book that I would want to read that nobody has written, you know. I kind of hold that space. Like I want to write the book that I would like to read that nobody's written.
That's a good space.
It is.
Because it creates potentially its own audience.
Yeah, but that's hard to market because it's kind of like you've got to market it from zero. You've got to actually create that.
I understand.
Space.
Yeah. Right. But you're writing authentically to you.
Yeah. So I would say that it is a crossover genre. People who...
Yeah, that was my first question.
People who like...
I planned that.
Yeah.
Certainly crossover fiction.
Yeah.
Kind of literary fiction and crime fiction and fantasy fiction.
Yeah.
It's some matrices of these three things.
Yeah.
Because even though it's not in the genre sense, I also I think of it as primarily being a love story. So
sure, yeah, a romance. Well, not a romance,
but it's not I don't
love
think
story.
of it as being a romance novel. But it is its spine is really built out of a relationship and a love story.
Right, but that's your literary sense, isn't it? It's character driven.
It is. Yes, it is. It's a character-driven fantasy story with noir crime fiction tropes.
Like I said, I could never write this book again. You know, they could never come from my brain.
The elevator pitch is not.
No, I love it. I love it because that's where we began this entire interview.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
I just want to write things that you have not read before. You know, you've definitely not read that before.
Yeah.
I think there's a market for that, but
I do too.
Yeah.
But it's hard to market too. I agree, and I'm glad that you've agreed that there is a market for it, but it's one problem to kind of like create a thing that has never been created, and it's another thing to like sell that thing that people don't know kind of how to.
True.
When there's not already that category in your brain.
Right.
It's hard.
They don't type that into Amazon.
They don't search that.
They don't search that.
Yeah.
That's the
Right. Yeah.
That's what's hard.
So in that sense, the way that I've been trying to kind of frame it for people is just through kind of combinations of those things.
Yeah.
It's a crime fantasy. It's just kind of combinations of those
Right. Yeah.
things. It's a literary fantasy
With gothic noir prose.
Yeah, sure.
That's what
Sure.
I love
those
prose.
I just kind of like make them up as I go.
Well, of course.
And every once in a while I'm like, oh, that was a good one. Like write that one down.
Yeah. I mean, I think anything we're exposing on this podcast and many others is we have no plan. Adrian actually does because he's retelling these 7 stories, but when it comes down to the day-to-day stuff, we're just
and especially like how to market it, like how to send it out into the world and tell people about it. I'm so not worrying about that when I'm actually writing.
No.
And maybe I should more.
I respect that so much.
Well, you
I don't even know how you do that.
You can't. Or you're not going to be, like we talked about earlier, you can't be in the headspace. You can't be thinking about marketing.
It's a different brain. It's a different brain.
You can't be thinking about marketing when you're trying to create something. My favorite part about writing is creating. I hate that and this is the honest God truth, like with some stuff lately I've been sharing a lot on Facebook about, stuff that's been happening. I hate that part. I hate saying buy my book. Oh,
I don't mind saying buy my book.
Oh, I'm not good at it.
But telling you that like you should buy my book instead of
I will say buy
something else.
I will say buy Adrian's book before mine. I have no problem. This whole podcast was created so that I could say buy Adrian's book instead of mine. That's this whole podcast. That's why we started it, right? I mean,
no, it's true.
We're
promoting other authors.
Promoting other authors.
Yeah, buy them both.
Yeah, buy them. Yeah.
Kase's book is awesome.
Buy them both. Yeah, buy them both. I love it. From 2 Ogden authors, buy them
Which
both.
is cool, by the way.
Which is very cool. This is one of the I like Renaissance Kase, and I don't know if it's a vibe because I think that we've had better conversation. We've had some really great conversations, and this was one of my favorites. So
this is a good one.
Really appreciate. I feel like I learned when I learned something. I feel like that was a great podcast.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean,
it goes by fast.
It goes by really fast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we just hit 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Today, this is Kase Johnstun, literally podcast. We are podcasting from Banyan One. Do you say Banyan One or Banyan Studios?
Sure, Banyan One's
it was Banyan One
here
forever.
Banyan Studios.
Well, it was Banyan One. Or
This is the Banyan One trailer inside Banyan Studios.
I was wondering.
You like to get specific with it. That's not necessarily the...
Well, I was wondering if there's going to be a Banyan 2. This is Banyan 1 with Brandon and our guest, Adrian Stumpp, with talking about his book, The Crow's Head. And we just want to thank you again. I really had a really good time today.
Yeah, me too. This was a great conversation.
And thank you, Roosters.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're
Thanks,
so glad to have you. And other Ogden authors, it's really just cool to sit face to face and say that we're working in this space together and trying to create a literary community. And I think Ogden is really rich.
I do too.
Yeah.
Ogden's a great place to be a writer.
It really is. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Awesome.
Sweet.
Awesome.
Cool.
That was so much fun.
Yeah, that was painless.
Well,
I'm surprised it was over so fast.
It was, 45 minutes.